What about non-believers, though? What do we do with this passage where Paul says, I told you in my letter not to associate with the sexually immoral people. Not at all meaning the sexually immoral of this world or the greedy or swindlers, since you would need to go out of the world, he says. But I'm writing you to not associate with anyone who bears the name of brother if he's guilty of sexual immorality or greed or an idolater or reveler or drunkard or swindler. Not even to eat with such a one, for what have I to do with judging others? Is it not those inside the church whom you are to judge? God judges those outside. So, first thing I think Paul is clear on here is that Christians are not to avoid contact, they're just to avoid contamination. Christians aren't to avoid contact with non-believers. You can't. That's what Paul says. There's no way that you're never going to bump into a sinner. You can't live in this world and not have interactions with these people. The difference is you don't want to follow their patterns. You don't want to follow their conduct. And that's what he's getting at in 1 Corinthians. Again, the judgment Paul has here is writing them off as completely unsafe. Because let's face it, Paul would go into every city that he could find, start preaching in the temple, or in the synagogue, I should say, and start with the Jews, preach to them, and then he'd turn to the Gentiles when the Jews would refuse the message that he offered them. And he did this over and over again. So he never wrote anybody off. Even though the results, by and large, were the same, he'd usually pick up some followers here and there, even from the Jewish side of life. But he would never consider writing anyone off as unsavable, lost to hell. And really, we see in the New Testament many, many examples of the most godly men going to the most evil, despicable people and witnessing to them. Paul in jail, witnessing to Festus, things like that. How about John the Baptist? Right? What was going on there? Why was John the Baptist beheaded? Well, it tells us in Matthew 14, Herod had seized John and bound him and put him in prison for the sake of Herodias, his brother Philip's wife, because John had been saying to them, it's not lawful for you to have her. So there you go. Herod had taken his brother's wife as his own wife. And John the Baptist called him out on it. Now, that's sexual immorality. Does the 1 Corinthians 5 passage contradict that? No, because John the Baptist is trying to show Herod that he's violating the law of God, even though he's not necessarily a Jew. He's an Idumean. He's from Edom. So you have this tension here. Now, it cost John his head, by the way. It wasn't an easy message to deliver, but he delivered it. But he's not the only one. Stephen, standing before the Sanhedrin, gives this wonderful sermon in Acts chapter 7, where he recounts over and over again how God sent messengers to the Jewish people, and the Jewish hierarchy would reject those messengers. God always coming back to correct his people, and the Jewish leadership would reject them. And he sums it up in the ever so loving way of Stephen by saying, you stiff-necked people, uncircumcised in heart and ears. Now I want you to think about like the Jewish high priests, the head of all Jewish religious rituals, being told that they are uncircumcised. Just after we talked about what meaning, the prayer, thank God I'm not a Gentile, he's calling them that basically. You stiff-necked people, uncircumcised in heart and ears, you always resist the Holy Spirit. As your fathers did, so you do. Which of the prophets did your fathers not persecute? And they killed those who announced beforehand the coming of the righteous one, whom you have now betrayed and murdered. You who received the law as delivered by angels did not keep it. Now this was enough for those guys to put their hands over their ears and start throwing rocks at Stephen. But he's definitely judging them. He's definitely calling them on the carpet. And even Jesus himself. Here's the thing with this passage in Matthew 7. You just got to keep reading it. Just jump down 7 verses. Okay, Matthew 7, verse 15. He makes a distinction himself. He says, beware of false prophets who come to you in sheep's clothing, but inwardly are ravenous wolves. You will recognize them by their fruits. So you have to be good at judging fruit. We can call out sin. We are to be both salt and light in the world. Jesus says it in the same sermon.